Hello and welcome back to the Crew of Japan podcast. It's Nigel, and today we're continuing our discussion with Rob Dyer of The Real Japan. In this episode, Rob teaches us about an amazing onsen town.
Basically, it's a natural hot spring town, and it's got 7 natural springs.
Places that are still on Rob's travel wish list after 20 years of traveling to Japan.
So there's the remote Ogasawara Islands in the Pacific. So the only way to get there is by ferry from Tokyo, actually, and the ferry takes about 24 hours.
And what it's like to navigate Japan with survival Japanese.
For anyone who speaks, little or no Japanese, signs these days, particularly even in the countryside, if you're on a JR railway line, you can go into the middle of nowhere and the station signs will always be in Romaji in English.
All that and more are just ahead on today's episode. Welcome back to the Crew of Japan podcast, a weekly podcast where we take you on audio journeys through Japanese culture. As I mentioned in the very beginning, this episode is actually part 2 of our discussion with Rob Dyer from The Real Japan. As a reminder, Rob is the CEO and founder of The Real Japan, a company which helps travelers build their dream itineraries to Japan. But furthermore, The Real Japan also serves as a fantastic resource if you already have an itinerary or just want some travel tips for your next journey to Japan. We had a great time in part 1 discussing Rob's background and the methodology of off-the-beaten-path travel. In this episode, we're actually diving into Rob's specific recommendations of things to do in the Kansai area that are off the beaten path. Just like last week's episode, we'll have this interview, and then Doug and I will return after the interview to discuss some of our thoughts about things we discussed with Rob. Without further ado, let's jump right in.
We focused for that specific portion on Kyoto, but I mean, obviously that can be applied to other areas in the Kansai region. So, where, outside of Kyoto, a lot of people, or maybe they know Kyoto, they maybe been before, and they want to maybe focus their trip elsewhere in Kansai. Where do you recommend people starting? I know we talked a lot about Osaka earlier, as well as Kobe. Would it make sense to anchor down in one of those cities and then kind of travel out each day, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, totally. I mean, to begin with, I would, to keep things simple, I would definitely use Osaka as a base and travel out from there, because as I touched on earlier, the way it's located, you can cover a lot of ground with day trips out of Osaka, probably more so than you can, perhaps with the exception of Tokyo, but any other major city in Japan. And to get the most out of the region, and if you want to see some specific places, you might want to allow a few overnight stays if possible. So aside from Osaka and Kyoto, there's a whole bunch of places that are in 1 or 2 hours train travel, whether that's on a Shinkansen or like the bullet trains using your rail pass if you're going to go down that route, or as I mentioned earlier, traveling by local trains, because there's plenty of options to do that. But you've got Nara, Kobe, definitely it's a nice harbour town. Himeji, with what for me still is the best castle in Japan. The Himeji Castle is absolutely stunning. North, actually, going back to Kyoto for a moment, but we haven't mentioned it, but it's a great little find, is Kinosaki Onsen, which is on the Sea of Japan. It sits in a natural cove overlooking the Sea of Japan. It's about 2 hours north of Kyoto. So if you're in Kyoto and you're looking for a day trip, that's definitely one to do. But Kinosaki is worth setting aside some time. We can maybe chat on that, but it's worth setting aside some time for, because, well, I'll just dive in now, actually, because it's a place that I love and I like to revisit. But basically, it's a natural hot spring town, and it's got 7 natural springs. And the idea there that you would go there for is to stay in a traditional inn, a ryokan. And so these are like the traditional traveling inns, so old school wooden buildings. They themselves often have natural hot springs onsen in their grounds. But the real thing with Kinosaki Onsen is all the ryokan, all the inns in the town work on a system where if you book a night stay in any of the ryokan, you automatically get a pass to all the onsens, the public baths that are in the town. And everybody dons their yukata, their sort of summer kimono, and puts on the gaiter, the shoes, the old wooden sandals, and they clip-clop up and down the streets. And this sounds like a real kind of, Disney version of Japan, but it's not. It's absolutely authentic. I mean, that's what I love about it. It's like traveling back in time. And the heart of the old town is preserved by sort of local ordinances. So they're not allowed to build above, I think it's 2 stories. So, the whole of the old town, and it's got a river that runs all the way through it to the ocean, and loads of bridges to cross over. So it's like super, super picturesque, and it is, literally like going back 400 or 500 years and what it was like. And it just really hasn't changed other than the roads are tarmacked. It's just like walking in old Japan. So Kinosaki is a great place to go. Koyasan in Wakayama Prefecture, that's kind of south of Osaka. So you're getting into the mountain region there, and that's quite a spiritual area. So there's in Koyasan, in Mount Koya, there is a Shingon Buddhist temple there, and a settlement that was set up a few hundred years ago, and that's got some stunning places to see. And all these, like a lot of Japan, the mountains are forested, so it's really dense forest. And then all of a sudden, you'll get these huge wooden pagodas and brightly coloured religious buildings. So Koyasan is a good tip. Actually, you can get a nice luxury train, but it only takes like about an hour from Osaka. And that's a great way to sort of go down to that area.
I did that.
Oh, wow.
Oh, did you? It's the Blue Symphony.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
So that's actually part of that temple pilgrimage that I wanted to do during my study abroad here on Shikoku.
Cool. Yeah.
I actually ended up doing it while I was on jet, and Koyasan is like kind of like the last place to go. Once you do the circuit, it's like Koyasan's kind of like the next step. You go there last. So I ended up doing that when I made a trip to Osaka. I said, all right, well, I'm just like a little like side quest.
It's perfect
to Koyasan. It's beautiful though.
Wow.
It really is.
Yeah, and it's one of those places that it's really good to do an overnight. Just one night there would be fine, because that'll really give you the chance to immerse yourself in the whole experience, because you've not got to be religious or particularly into religion. I'm not, but the whole experience is immersive. You can stay in a Buddhist temple, and again, this goes back to the Sekiyuba restaurant in Kyoto that I mentioned earlier, because they're all vegan or vegetarian, so all the food is, I think it's vegan. But if you want, you can, when you book your stay, you can partake in some of the the actual experiences that the monks do every day. So when I did it, I did some morning prayers and chanting. So just getting into that and kind of really zenning out that whole experience. And I remember I was there January last year, 2020. Yeah, last time I was in Japan, actually, just before everything locked down.
Wow.
And I did a live stream from there, and it was just at the end of the snowy season. But I was walking around in the evening, and that was a wonderful experience, having stayed in the temple and so on. So then, if you like onsen, hot springs, then Arima Onsen is kind of north in the mountains, north of Kobe. Very easy to get to from Osaka. That really is good for a day trip. That's kind of, they're geared up for a lot of day trippers as well. So Arima Onsen, that's a good one to visit. If you want to go slightly north, then you've got Shiga Prefecture and Lake Biwa, which is Japan's biggest lake. And there's an amazing place in the mountains just around there, also in Shiga Prefecture, called the Miho Museum. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's an absolutely incredible place. It's a privately owned museum by a super wealthy woman, and it's just such an interesting story. I don't know that I can't remember all the factual details, but basically it's a private collection of her art collection from around. It's like an international museum, but in a kind of more compact collection. but she described it herself as Shangri-La. And it's not only is it a private collection of a museum, but they founded a religious movement. And this religious movement is dedicated to the pursuit of beauty through art and nature. So when you go and when you arrive, it's like something out of a Bond film. It's incredible. There's this tunnel in the mountains, and you get in these little electric buggies. They take you through this tunnel. You come out on the other side, and I think it's something like 3/4 of the museum is built into the mountainside. And you enter through this really kind of dark entranceway. And then what they've done on the back side of the museum is it's all glass, and it overlooks this mountain landscape into Shiga Prefecture in the back. And then in the distance, you can see this kind of amazing, huge structure. And that's the headquarters of this religious movement. It's like their temple where they go to. It's an incredible place. Miho Museum in Shiga Prefecture. It's an unknown. It really isn't. It's so unknown, and it's an absolutely remarkable place to go to if you ever get the chance. Definitely put that on your list.
Absolutely have not heard of that before, so that's incredible. Wow.
Well, I hadn't. We were with friends in Osaka a few years ago, and the weird thing was they said, let's do a day trip. Where should we go? Do you want to go here? Do you want to go here? And they said, we found this kind of museum that looks interesting in the mountains. And I thought, I don't know. I don't really, it was a nice day. I thought, do I want to be stuck inside a museum in the middle of nowhere? And then I started looking online, and there was nothing online about this place. I could only find a couple of blogs that mentioned it. And even the photographs on the official website are really kind of like uninspiring. But I can't remember what it was. Something about it just sounded intriguing. So we went there, and it was absolutely incredible. One of the most unforgettable places I've been to.
So what are some other off the beaten path sites and experiences in the Kansai region that we haven't discussed?
So a personal one for me would be high on my list, and I would recommend this to other people. You've actually touched on it a little bit earlier, Doug, but it's one that I really enjoyed doing, was the Kumano Kodo pilgrimage route in Wakayama Prefecture. So I'm not sure how long the full route is. I think it's about sort of 30 miles, something like that. I'm not quite sure. I can't really remember. But basically, you can do the whole thing over a couple of days. So it's kind of like, you can make it as leisurely as you like, but it's exploring through the mountains, essentially. But you can dip in and out of the route in a single day or for a few hours if that's what you want to do. And, you're following in the steps of what pilgrims have done for over 1,000 years. And what I would say there on the route, there's a place called the Kumano Hongu Taisha Shrine, which is a really kind of important spiritual spot. So that's always a place to head to. But nearby, there's a place called Oyu no Hara. And there is the largest torii gate in Japan. It's absolutely huge. And it's in the middle of a rice field as well. So you've got farmers tending their rice paddies. And then there's this absolutely vast, it's made of concrete, but it's incredible sight, this huge torii. So that's definitely something to single out if you are going to go down and dip in or do the Kumano Kodo route. Another place that I would suggest that's in that kind of area and then to do an overnight stay would be, it's another onsen place called Unomine. I don't know if you've come across Unomine. So one of the things that they do there a lot is the onsen, the hot springs there, like, are in the street and they bubble. They're really like, they're boiling hot, and it's quite common. You go to a little shop on the corner and just buy some a basket of eggs, and then you drop the eggs in the water and you boil them there and then in a few minutes. And, you just eat boiled eggs that you've just boiled in the hot water. And that's, I think, Unomine, is one of Japan's three oldest onsen towns. So, the people have been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's a good place to stay. Also, in Nara Prefecture, there's a place called Mount Yoshino. Again, this is like really densely wooded mountains. So, they're spectacular in kind of any season. But I like walking in the mountains in the autumn, obviously, for the colours, for the leaves in fall. When you get all those fantastic colours. But also in the winter for snow. Yoshino, there's some lovely little temples and shrines tucked away. But like a lot of the places in Japan, you might read about it somewhere on a blog or in a book or something, and you go there and you think this is right in the middle of nowhere. But there'll be a train to a station that's maybe a few miles away. Then there'll be a bus that connects it, or there'll be a taxi that's waiting. And Japan's really good at that. So it really does make going off the beaten track possible, because they're kind of really good at helping people, that kind of Japanese customer service thing.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to go too remote, then I would just say head for Nara. It's a wonderful city to explore on foot. You've got Naramachi, that historic merchant district that kind of bustles with, independent cafes, restaurants, and artisans stores and those kind of places. There's one place I haven't managed to get to that's been on my list for years, but you need to get it just right for the weather, and that's Takeda Castle in the north of Himeji. So beyond Himeji Castle, it's in the north of that area, and it's kind of the literal castle in the sky, because in the autumn time, the fog clouds form below the remains of this castle, so it looks like you're floating in the sky. But you need the kind of ideal weather conditions, and you need to start really early to capture that spectacle. But I've never quite did it. We were supposed to go one time and the weather wasn't right, so we just bowed out and did something else instead.
Man, I need to go back and listen to this episode like 3 times.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get a
same,
notebook, like you
same.
said. I'm gonna get a notebook and I'm gonna jot down all these, because that's a lot. Oh my goodness. There's so many things that sound amazing to go check out. Like I'd heard of what was it? Arima Onsen. I've heard of that, but the one in Shiga, that sounds like amazing. And the is it Kinosaki? Is that what you said? Onsen?
Kinosaki Onsen, yeah.
That sounds great too. So I mean, I'm a big onsen guy, so I'm gonna have to go. Oh man, I have a lot of homework to do after this to go research it. But let's shift. You mentioned Yuba earlier, which kind of got me a little hungry. And on this podcast, we love like talking about food. We've had a bunch of episodes where we kind of digress into conversations about food. So when you're exploring Kansai, what are some of the culinary delicacies or some of the must-try dishes that you've experienced? Like what would maybe like your top 3 dishes be?
Oh, you're tough there. That's limited.
Yeah, I mean you can go to 5 if you want to, but
okay. I won't talk for too long.
Maybe they don't have to be like number 1 is the best, but maybe a select.
Yeah, sure. No, I did think about this, because I was thinking, how am I going to shortlist this? But I thought, okay, so in Kyoto, but seasonal stuff, because Japan does the seasonal food so well. So if you're in Kyoto in winter, I would eat something called buri shabu. Buri. So buri is yellowtail fish, and it's in the Tango region. But it's kind of like shabu shabu, which is the very thin strips of beef that you put in almost like a nabe, like a hot pot. But instead of meat, you have the yellowtail. So that's one I would suggest. That's buri shabu. In Nara, they have this thing called kakinoha sushi. And this is usually, I'm a big fan of mackerel fish. I love mackerel, however it comes. So they usually marinate sliced mackerel and salmon on like a sushi rice. And then it's pressed and wrapped in a persimmon leaf. So this is kind of something, again, like a really kind of local thing, a seasonal thing. It's really distinctive of Nara. Okay. So that I would suggest. And then if you do like your meat and you've heard of Kobe beef, there's another one called Omi beef. Omi, OHMI maybe, beef, which is actually Japan's oldest beef. And that's from cattle raised around the Lake Biwa area in Shiga prefecture that I mentioned earlier. So those are 3 kind of really distinctive cuisines that are kind of seasonal as well to a degree of those places. But if you're going to be in Osaka, which we touched on earlier, obviously is a real foodie capital of Japan and widely recognized as such, then obviously it's rightly famous for its takoyaki, the octopus balls. So yeah, try any of the city centre street stalls selling those. You're not going to go wrong. They'll be great. Some of the best ramen in Japan can be found in Osaka as well. The best places are often tucked away, but the locals will regularly queue outside, and you should just do the same. And then if you like okonomiyaki, the thick pancakey thing, then there's a place called Ajinoya in Osaka. Again, it's expect to queue. You can book ahead on weekdays, but it's kind of in one of the Michelin guides. It's not like a Michelin star thing, but it's like their green book or something. So it's kind of well known if you're into okonomiyaki, but that's a must try if you're in Osaka.
Osaka, okonomiyaki, or Hiroshima?
No, I don't really like Hiroshima.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, because I find it, well, the couple of times I've had it, maybe it was just the restaurants that I tried, but I found it was almost like too sweet. It depends what they mix in with it.
I see.
So they do kind of mix it a little bit differently.
Okay.
But yeah, I kind of like the more old school savory approach.
Yeah, I'm more of a,
Yeah, same here. Well,
Right.
all of us
Same.
same. There we go. Yeah.
There you go. So that's one thing
There you go.
definitive from this podcast
I'll
is
agree.
that
Yeah.
is the better okonomiyaki. The fight starts here.
there's gonna be some really offended Hiroshima Fu like
Yeah.
okonomiyaki people out there right now.
I know. So you've been traveling to Japan constantly since 2000. I believe the year 2000, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, since 2000. You mentioned the Castle in the Sky place. What are a few other places that are on your bucket list that you still haven't visited?
Yeah, there's loads. Honestly, there's so many. I mean, this is what I love about traveling in Japan is, you might find a city in a region that you kind of get to know or you've been to once and you really love, but then you might use that as inspiration to like explore that region. And there's so much reward to be had by just kind of allowing yourself that chance, if you can, to do that exploration. But there's a few on my, I really want to go list. So there's the remote Ogasawara Islands in the Pacific. So the only way to get there is by ferry from Tokyo, actually, and the ferry takes about 24 hours to get to, and it's kind of known as the Japanese Galapagos because it's really isolated, and so the flora and fauna that's there is really unique to the islands. So it's a small cluster of islands. So yeah, I'd love to go there. Another area on Honshu on the mainland, and actually just kind of nudges onto the edge of the Kansai region, actually, is the Chugoku region in Honshu that overlooks the Sea of Japan area. There's a few places that I've been along that coastline, and they've been wonderful. Tiny little towns, but got so much charm. Lovely little restaurants, old antique places to rummage around. Wonderful, wonderful countryside. So I'd like to kind of maybe do a plan to really explore that kind of northern coastline a little bit more. And then, one of the places that I know least about, this is kind of the amusing thing, is Tokyo, because I'm there so infrequently. In fact, when I first flew into Japan, the first year was to Tokyo. And then literally, because we talked about Kansai, we were using Kansai all the time, other than just flying into Tokyo and then immediately flying out to get a connecting flight to Kansai. When I went to Tokyo, it was 10 years before I went back. So I don't really know much about Tokyo at all.
Wow.
If you want to know about Tokyo, don't ask me because I won't be able to help you very much. But so I'd love to get to know some of the hidden Tokyo neighborhoods, get guided by a local. So yeah, I'd like that. And then I visited a few of the Yaeyama Islands, really at the southwestern chain, beyond Okinawa, and they are absolutely glorious. So pristine and wonderful, wonderful little villages and, subtropical landscape and incredible seas. And so I want to go and see all the Yaeyama Islands at some point as well.
Yeah, man. If you ever need some tips on Tokyo, let me know. I got some. I lived there for a year. I got a couple.
Really? Cool.
There's a restaurant. I'm not going to digress into this too much, but I got some places. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, no, this is the thing. You just need a local to tap into if you can. So
Yeah.
We do have friends in Tokyo, so we just rely on them when we go.
Yeah,
they'll just take us to a really good restaurant, and it'll be tucked away in the middle of nowhere, and most tourists will never get there, sort of thing. So yeah, if you can get an insider on the job, that's always great.
There you go. So another question, or not really question, but something you had mentioned earlier is kind of tapping into the locals to get some suggestions or to get some ideas of places to check out. But sometimes to do that, they may not speak English, and a lot of people are concerned, like especially if you're going off the beaten path, whether or not you need a certain level of Japanese to navigate and get around efficiently and effectively. we mentioned that obviously with varying degrees of Japanese language level here, it's not a requirement. But do you think that, do you have any tips for travelers that maybe aren't very proficient in Japanese and would be looking to do those types of trips? Or maybe what are some, I'm getting at, like how would you approach it, and what ways do you engage those locals when there is a language barrier?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot actually, and in fact, because I was getting questions about it, emails from people who were visiting the site and so on, I decided to write a blog post specifically about this whole kind of big kind of elephant in the room, but it's not because everyone talks about it, but it's and I called the blog post "How to Travel in Japan When You Don't Speak Japanese," and it's by far my most read blog post. And so I then actually published an ebook with the same title, just to give some people some practical tips. And a lot of it is really just about reassuring people. So you definitely don't need a high level of Japanese to explore anywhere in Japan, I would argue. Will you be at a slight disadvantage from time to time? Yeah, I guess you would be. But it's not a deal breaker, and people shouldn't let it be. Obviously, if you want to really delve into some particular cultural aspect, and it's got particular language or history around it, then you're going to lose some of the subtleties of that. And if you want to really explore that as an individual, then the more Japanese you get to explore niche subjects is where you perhaps might get more personal fulfillment and reward out of that. But there are things you can do to prepare in advance just to make sure things go more smoothly. One thing that's a real advantage in Japan, I would say, is getting around using public transport is really straightforward, I think, compared to other countries necessarily. For anyone who speaks, little or no Japanese, signs these days, particularly even in the countryside, if you're on a JR railway line, you can go into the middle of nowhere and the station signs will always be in Romaji in English. They'll have the translations. Arm yourself in advance. If you're a bit old school like me, I still like my Berlitz phrase books. I still got a battered one that I still carry with me. I just like, I like to refer to it as much as possible. Or obviously, there's plenty of phone apps now that you can use to help you translate, particularly if you're in situations like you need something to translate some kanji, using Google Translate. That's way, way better now than it used to be years ago. I used to use it and it was just absolute gibberish. It was useless. And you needed an internet connection to work and all this kind of thing. But it's much, much better now and improving loads. So, getting some apps that can help you almost real time with specific conversations is good. But I think really it's just a lot about because a lot of it's people get really hung up about it. And I know people, I've literally had people write to me, email me who are subscribers and say, they've put off going to Japan because they want to spend a year studying the language. And there's no reason why you shouldn't do that, but certainly don't let it be a barrier. And the Japanese as a people, so if you're going in the middle of nowhere, as long as you keep your kind of body language measured and your tone of voice kind of calm and not loud, go to shopkeepers and just, pick up a few phrases, obviously learn some basic phrases. I mean, this is what I always say. And there's some on my website and in my book and so on. But get some basics now so that you can at least be polite to people and converse, a little bit. Then just use that in the context of just asking locals and just use your body language, use what little bits of Japanese slot in English words. If you speak them phonetically and with a Japanese accent, it sounds cheesy, but it's absolutely true. And they use a lot of loan words. They call them loan words from, international languages, from English particularly. So if there's a word that you're thinking, I don't know what that word is in Japanese, if you said it in English with a Japanese pronunciation, phonetically pronounce it, chances are that, a good number of times they're going to know what you mean. So, and the Japanese are such friendly people. They'll really go, you'll maybe get one or two older people that will run away if you try and speak to them. But, in the big cities in particular, children come up to you, just want to converse and practice their English. But even in the quiet places, this is why I always say go to shopkeepers, because they're proud of what they do. They want to share their local knowledge and experience. And of all the people in an area, the local shopkeepers or innkeepers are going to be the ones that are most familiar with international travelers. So, they're good people to try and tap into if you can. But just don't overthink it. Don't let it worry you too much, because honestly, as somebody who's got survival Japanese and not much more, and when I started out years ago, my wife and I, and it wasn't like I was relying on her all the time. We split up a lot. We do our own thing. I go traveling for a few days. She goes traveling for a few days. So, it's not like I'm using her as a crutch all the time to, for the language, but, you can get by. Absolutely.
Yeah, and one thing you said, I absolutely live and die by the like making like the English words like sound Japanese to converse, because sometimes it just it works.
It does.
It just does. You never know which
Yeah.
ones will sometimes, but it
Yeah.
sometimes works. And I think I got by on the JET program when I lived there, doing that probably more often than not, working with teachers and stuff. So
It's
and
surprising
then
how
eventually
far it
figure out
can
the
get
actual
you.
word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always find myself doing that unintentionally, and I'm like trying to stop myself. But it's funny. It could actually really be helpful for people as well.
Yeah. So and we've touched a little bit on transportation, like flying into Kansai International Airport. As probably one of the best ones to fly in there. And then you also mentioned some of the other smaller, like regional airports within Kansai that you can use to kind of, as we like to say, puddle jump from one place to the next within the areas. But obviously, air travel is kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. Doing all going through the logistics of going through security and packing back, like everything getting there. Sometimes it's easier to get a rail pass or buses and whatnot. What other options should people consider? Obviously the JR Rail Pass is a big one, but is Uber available in places? You had mentioned taxis earlier. How would you approach traveling to some places where there may be limited public transportation?
Yeah. So I would say, since we're focusing on the Kansai area, Kansai International Airport is the biggest international hub in the region, and it's one of Japan's busiest airports. So this is going to work in our favor. So it serves international and internal travel well. So it makes a great kind of hub and spoke, if you know what I mean, by using it as a base, and you've got all these routes flying out of it. It's a great airport to use for that. And there's lots of low cost carriers now in Japan. So you can fly down to Kyushu for like $50 easily. That kind of thing is really practical now. So you can save time using the airports. And then I touched on it earlier. I think in the north of Osaka, there's also the smaller Itami Airport, which I think is also known as Osaka International Airport.
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's quite a similar.
that's tricky.
You want to get those right because they're quite different airports.
Yeah.
It's a lot smaller.
Don't want to go to the wrong one if you're going out.
Yeah. So it's Kansai International and
That's interesting.
Osaka International, but it's known as Itami is the actual name of the airport. They like to brand it as Osaka International because it's good for their, makes them feel good.
Wow. Yeah. Because I always call Kansai kicks, because that's like the airport symbol. So that's a good way to separate.
I do, but but it means jargon to most people.
Yeah.
But I always refer to it as kicks. So yeah. Itami is the other one, but I often use Itami for internal flights, particularly to other islands off of Honshu, basically. Obviously, there's the Japan Rail Pass, and there's a load of stuff around that. But basically, it's going to quickly pay for itself if you're doing a couple of long distance trips, and it can definitely be one of the best ways to see a lot of Japan if you're happy to move around rather than use one city as a base. And rather be stuck in a city for too long. One of the practical things you can consider there that I get asked quite often is, but what about my luggage? And obviously you want to pack accordingly to your travel style, but what you can do is use the Japan Rail Pass. You have some city centres that you use as bases for a couple of days and then move on, but you can actually get your luggage, and the hotels will arrange this for you. You can get your luggage forwarded to your next destination. So on the train, you just take like a day bag or a backpack and use that for a couple of days if you're doing some overnight stuff. So I would definitely I'm a big rail fan wherever I am in the world, and Japan is just one of the best countries to travel by rail. It opens up so much of the country, and as soon as you get on a rail, Shinkansen in any of the major cities, within 30 minutes, you're seeing nothing but countryside. I mean, that's what's great about rail travel in Japan. So definitely the rail pass is worth it. Uber is in Japan, but I've actually never used it, and it's in a reasonable number of cities. It's not universal by any means. It's in the major cities. It's in Osaka. It's in Tokyo. I think it's in Kyoto too, but it's in some smaller places as well. But I think it operates differently in Japan than in most countries. So it works more as a taxi hailing app, I think, than for booking private cars. So I use Uber all the time here in the UK. Again, my wife and I don't drive, so we just get the Uber app and we just have a pick up a local car. And these are private people doing the car hire through the Uber app. In Japan, it's been licensed differently. So it works, you're hailing normal taxis. So actually the prices through Uber seem more expensive than if you're using regular taxis. But I can understand why they're popular with some people, and they're quite practical for airport runs. So if you want to pick up from an airport to take you into the city centre. But honestly, the public transport from airports into city centres into Japan is fantastic. And I would just jump on a train or get a monorail if there's one. But if you do want to use regular taxis, which we use a lot, and you can book some in advance, like MK Taxis is quite a big brand in Japan. They're really good and really reliable. So you can use those like Uber, and they'll probably be cheaper than Uber. The languages can be a little bit challenging with taxis sometimes. What I always say is if you're flying into like one of the major airports and you're getting a taxi out, not going to be a problem really. Just tell them the name of the hotel or your destination. It's going to be okay. If you're in the quieter places or you're getting off the beaten path a little bit, one of the tips is to always have the destination written in kanji on a piece of paper, just so you can show that to the driver. So you don't have to worry about pronouncing it. But if you make sure you get that from doing your research in advance, the name of your ryokan in the mountains or the hotel where you're staying at, or even just the name of the town if you're that worried, just have it in the kanji, the Japanese kanji, and just show that to the driver so that they've at least got that, and you'll be okay there. In the more remote places, public transportation can be patchy and sometimes even non-existent. So, for example, I've been to Sado Island. I really like, I don't know if you know the taiko drummers, the kodo drummers. They're based on Sado Island. So that was one of the draws to go to Sado Island. And the only way you can get there is by ferry from, I think it's Niigata. And once you get on Sado Island, there's no railway lines at all. It's only buses or taxis to get around. I mean, it's not a big island, but even so. But the buses are really geared towards helping the locals go about their kind of daily business and for tourism. So even while you could use buses, there was some careful pre-planning. They're pretty infrequent. So, it would require a lot of timetable check-in and, that's kind of stuff that I kind of lose interest pretty quickly when it gets down to that level of detail.
Yeah.
So for me, the easiest option is just to hire a taxi for a few hours or even a half day or possibly a day. And actually, this isn't unusual in Japan. So, this kind of addresses almost kind of like the Uber question. So these can actually be great value as well, because they'll do it for a fixed amount. They'll tell you up front, they'll have a preset rate. And the great thing about these, when you get to, and we do this a lot when we're in the countryside, we're in the mountains, you get to a train station or a bus stop somewhere, and then you've got like another 20 minutes to get to the place you're going to. Use a taxi, and if you then want to use that to explore the region, or you're staying in a ryokan in the mountains somewhere, and that's part of your day plan, factor in a taxi. And honestly, we never really book these. We just turn up at the station. As long as you know there's a reasonable sized train station there or a bus station, then you're going to be able to pick up a taxi. And the taxis, these drivers, it's like they're like passionate locals. So some of them act as tour guides. And I've been in taxis where they've got a pre-printed card, laminated, Japanese one side, English in the other. So they'll take you to all the major spots, and you can basically say in the time available, I want to go to 1, 2, 3, and 4, and these will be partly places that you've already identified, and then they'll take you around. And they're used to doing this, so they're also the ones that are most likely to speak English too. So, that kind of hiring taxis in Japan as kind of an actual private service sounds extravagant, but it's not extortionate, and it's really good value for money, and you'll get that kind of guided tour thing thrown in for free. We had actually, it was a funny story. We were in a place one time, and the guy that did this, who was a taxi driver, he was really proud of showing us around. And he was a great photographer. So he kept making us stand at all these places. And he was taking these wonderful photos everywhere we went. So we've got a really great record from this guy. And so I said to him, well, it's my turn to turn the camera on you. Because I wanted to get a picture of this guy standing next to his taxi, because he was so proud that he was showing us around his region. So yeah, taxis can be a great answer sometimes.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of experience with taking those taxis, and like you said, some of them are really, they're eager to speak, especially to foreigners, because some of them, like you said, know some English and they want to practice.
Yeah.
But also they're really proud, and they also, being a taxi driver, know the area like in and out,
Yeah.
so they can like point you to places that are go routes in ways that you would never have thought of.
And it's such an efficient way of getting around. Buses are great in Japan, but they're slow. They take forever to get to places, and that's fine. Sometimes I like traveling by bus. I like seeing the countryside as part of the journey. But if you're time limited, taxis really are great. And as you say, they know the places, and you get in them, and they, as I say, a lot of them have these laminated cards, and they'll have things on there that you've never heard of. And then he'll say, oh, that's closed, or no, that's no good in the winter. It's not much to see there. Go here instead. That kind of thing. It's invaluable. Really good.
Well, I think invaluable and really good is what this entire episode has been, and having you on, sharing your experiences and knowledge about traveling the Kansai region, the off the beaten path options. I think our listeners will have a ton to digest and use in their their travels when Japan reopens, of course, to all of us.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon.
Yes, it is coming soon. Jennifer, our other co-host, runs the study abroad program for the University of New Orleans, and they are planning on going, next year. So it's great. But that's it for today, for this episode. So we just want to thank you so much, Rob, for coming on and sharing all your expertise. And we want to give you an opportunity to pitch The Real Japan and any upcoming releases, your blog, any other things you're working on.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Well, thanks for having me. It's been really enjoyable. It's been great to chat to you and share experiences and stories as well. I really like that aspect of the conversation. So if anyone is interested to know more about The Real Japan and how I might be able to help them with their travels, go to the website and subscribe. I would suggest to subscribe. So therealjapan.com/subscribe. And subscribers get my weekly Japan travel bulletin. So this is packed with sort of tips and pointers and links to resources and all this kind of stuff. So it's a regular email newsletter. And then along with that, they'll get all notifications of all new blog posts, any new videos that I post on my YouTube channel. I run a lot of giveaways, so I get prizes from companies based in Japan, like food tours or books or whatever it might be. So you can enter the giveaways, and subscribers always get priority access to those. They'll also get access to a resource library, which includes a load of free guides, checklists, ebooks, all about exploring Japan beyond Tokyo, and to make life easier for your trip planning. And our subscribers also get access to my private Facebook group, where I go in there on a daily basis and we just chat about stuff, and people can ask questions of other members. And it's a really kind of supportive and friendly group, just a few hundred people really trying to help each other out. Really good. And a lot of the people that are in the group, like a lot of my subscribers, actually live in Japan. So a lot of people that visit my site and actually use my services live in Japan. It's just that they don't have the time to do all the research and all that kind of thing. So if any of your listeners want to check out my Japan guidebooks, I've got a few guidebooks and travel planning services, then just go to therealjapan.com/store and they can delve and investigate to their heart's content. But as ever, if I'm on all the usual social channels as The Real Japan. They can find me there. And if you want to just got any questions at any time, you can always email me at hello@therealjapan. I'll be happy to help out.
And I'll just add, your Twitter is awesome. You're always sharing some really amazing content on there. So for listeners, go check out the Twitter as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty active. Twitter's probably my favorite of the social channels, and I'm on there daily and chatting. And it's very conversational as well. So yeah, come and have a chat on Twitter. So I'm at The Real Japan #1 on Twitter, actually.
Oh, someone took the The real
I'm
Japan.
trying to get it back. I'm
I
trying
know.
to
I was
wrestle
gonna
it back.
say.
You gotta slide some yen under the table or something to them. Pay it
But
off.
if I'm all over Twitter, so if you put the hashtag the real Japan, you'll find me.
Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thanks again, Rob. This was great. We would love to have you on again. We can talk about another region of Japan, and
Thanks, guys.
if
Yeah,
if you'd be happy to come on, we'd be happy to have you. So, thanks for joining us on this episode.
Thank you.
great. Thanks, guys. Good to chat. Really enjoyed it.
All right, so that was a lot of really great information on the specifics within Kansai of how to get off the beaten path in Kansai. Okay, so first of all, what I want to do here is talk briefly about a few of the overarching topics, and then we'll dive into some of the specific places that Rob mentioned, and I'll mention my take, and you can throw your take too, Doug. So
Sounds good.
the first thing I wanted to revisit was the idea of using a place as a home base. For example, we asked Rob what did he think about using Osaka as a home base, and he thought that was a pretty good idea. So I was just going to ask you, what do you think? Is that something that you usually do when you travel, or do you kind of hop around from city to city?
I guess it depends what your plan is, or what your your lodging situation is. If you have something that's set for like a week in one place, then yeah, obviously having a home base. For example, my first trip to Kansai. I was staying with a friend's family in Nishinomiya, so that was obviously my home base. And then we jumped back and forth. We went to Nara, we went to Kyoto, we went to Osaka, we went to Himeji. We did the big ones. And used Nishinomiya as our home base. Another time, as I mentioned, I'd been to Koyasan on the podcast or on the interview, and at the time I was at a meetup with some friends in Osaka, and we were staying in Osaka for a few days. So a buddy and I decided to take a day trip to Koyasan. So that's it depends on your situation. I think if you have a place you want to be for whatever reason, whether it's nightlife or whether it's you just want consistent lodging situations, you don't have to worry about finding different places, then doing that day trip stuff and then coming back to a central place is never a bad thing, especially if you have like a rail pass to kind of cover the cost of those trains.
Yeah.
But if I don't know, if you are, if you say, all right, I'm just doing Osaka for a day, I don't need to be here after that, or I'm going to Kyoto for 2 days, and after that I'm moving on, I don't need to come back to Kyoto, then I don't think there's anything wrong with going and moving on to another city. And then as long as you can, again, the ease of finding lodging and the availability of that lodging, and that's I think that's the primary barrier in my opinion for those types of situations. Like, what is your lodging situation first, and then if you have a consistent place, then you can kind of go from there.
Yeah, same. And for me, I think at heart I'm a backpacker, so I like packing up and moving to a new city.
Yeah.
I would say every 2 to 3 days. But generally speaking, I think for me, if I'm in a city and I want to travel to another city, I will stay put and anchor down in the first city as long as that the one that I'm traveling to is not more than, I would say, probably an hour and a half to 2 hours away. So if we're crossing that threshold, I might go ahead and move camp to that second city.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of time, to spend, let's say, 2 hours
On a
there
train,
and back,
yeah.
right? But overall, no, I think that's a really good idea, like Rob said, to really anchor down. I did when I was there, I anchored down in Kyoto actually,
Yeah.
and from there I went to Osaka, went to Nara, and so on. And that worked for me, so it's
Yeah.
definitely possible.
And I think if you're anchoring down and then doing a lot of smaller places or like one-off like day trips,
Yeah,
that's definitely when you would want to anchor down. But if you're planning on like, hey, I have a lot to do in Nara or Kyoto or
yeah,
Shiga
definitely.
or wherever,
Then
um,
you might start to
yeah, then it may be
need
better
to.
just to relocate to a more central place in that
Right.
area, and
Right.
then kind of use that as your, just for the sake, because again, you don't want to spend too much time sitting on a train, 4 hours of your day, or even 3 hours of
Yeah.
your day.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah,
doesn't even
definitely.
take into consideration any movement on trains that you have to go between places in the middle of the day.
Right, right. And speaking of trains, we talked about these luxury trains,
Oh yeah.
which
Yeah.
yeah, I recently saw a picture. It was yesterday actually, and oh my god, it just looked amazing, to experience. And you said you actually had taken one of these trains before, right?
Yeah, well, so I don't know if the one I took was a luxury train. We did go from Osaka to Koyasan on it's called the Nankai train line or company. And they have a train line that goes from Namba to Kokuraku Bashi, which is the entrance to, or where you're at the base of Koyasan. And from there, you can take that one train line that's kind of like a direct shot. And I think they have the non-express and the express. And my buddy and I took the cheaper option, the the affordable option for us. So
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that.
no, no. And then once you get to Koyasan,
It lets you do more
yeah,
things once you get to Koyasan.
yeah. And I mean, once you get there, actually, not to digress too much, but once you get there, to get to actual the Koyasan like area, because it is a mountain, like temple in the mountains. So you actually need to hop onto a cable car and take a cable car ride
Wow,
for about five
nice.
minutes. So you take that train to the train station, and from there you kind of transition over to a cable car, and then take that up to Koyasan's like main level.
Wow.
Anyway,
Wow.
yeah, that was a little bit of more information about Koyasan that I don't know if I can't remember if we dabbled too far into that when we did the interview, but yeah, that luxury train line. So I've like grand class type stuff. Like I wish I had the financial situation to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I wish I could get back over there to get into a
Oh,
train, just in
that's
general.
the first step. Yeah.
Yeah, but I would love to take a grand class train, luxury train one day. But like, I don't know if I could justify the cost for a short train ride or even a long train ride.
I don't
It's
know,
just,
man. You see those pictures I was looking at yesterday, and I think you might quickly come to justify it. So,
I would love to try it one day. I just gotta figure out how I can justify it. I gotta coordinate some type of business travel over there somehow.
yeah, yeah. There you go. You do a vlog for the podcast. There you go. You gotta
There
you
you
gotta
go.
sample it and try it out so we can tell our listeners. There you go.
There you go.
Um, so that actually brings me to some of these specific places that Rob mentioned in the interview, and we're not going to go through all of them, but we just wanted to highlight some of the places that really stood out, places that maybe we've been to or really want to visit. And the first of those is Kinosaki Onsen. Um, I mean, I am, as often happens on these type of episodes, I am just sold. I went and looked up, the Kinosaki Onsen town, and oh my god, I mean, I don't know how I missed it on my first trip, but it is absolutely amazing. The town is seemingly wonderfully preserved, and actually, it says on its website that it is one of the oldest actually recorded onsens in Japan, going all the way back to the year 720. Um, so just amazing, Now, you have you been to this onsen first of all?
No, I haven't. I haven't. I would love to. I
Okay.
don't want to look at the pictures online because it's just going to depress me. Um, I've been to a couple like mountain onsen town type places before, and they're always just the ambiance of it is really cool, especially if you go in the winter and like you just see all the steam kind of coming out of
Oh
like
man.
various places where the onsen are going. It's just really cool, and it's one of the things I would love to go. Like every time I go back and visit, like we'll go to like an outdoor bath or something, at least once, just to do that, and just being able to like enjoy the fresh air and like nature around you while you're soaking in a very hot bath is just, I don't know, it's up there in terms of good feelings and good experiences. I don't know. It's just something you
Yeah.
can't really replicate here in the States. There are some, but not many.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this place has, I think, 7 distinct like onsen that you can go to, and then the town itself seems like it's really amazing. The nightlife, the restaurants, just the ambiance and the aesthetic of it all. It's just really amazing, and definitely top on my list of things to do. Uh, if I'm in Kansai, for sure, Kinosaki Onsen I will go to.
I
Um,
am absolutely passing this name on though to my in-laws because if
yeah.
we go, I think one day is absolutely going to be for USJ because my son wants to go to Super Mario World, or the Super Mario Land or whatever it's called, Nintendo World.
Hey, that's
But
awesome.
I know I want to go there too. But like if these kind of things though, like where they're somewhat accessible from that area, this is like the perfect type of like day trip. Let's do this for a day, go
Yeah.
stay overnight, and then do something else somewhere else on the way back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's at a two hour, roughly 2 hour train ride from Kyoto and 3 hour from Osaka. So
Yeah,
totally doable,
this and drivable probably too.
Yeah.
If you have a car, if you're of the people who want to rent a car and drive, there's probably drive. That's the thing too. Like these type of places, sometimes it's better to drive to
Mm.
because you'll pass through things that are so cool just to get to these towns. Like
Have you
there's so
have
many
you
things you
done a
may.
lot of driving in Japan?
Oh yeah, I had a car.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh man.
yeah.
What was that like?
Well, I didn't get any accidents or
Hey, yeah, that's good.
stoplight,
There you go.
tickets or anything like that. Never got stopped, so that's always a plus. It was, I think, the whole driving on the opposite side of the road from what I'm used to in the U.S. was a shock, especially when I first got my car. That was that was is great. We could do a whole
Yeah.
episode on driving if we
Oh, I
wanted to. That would
imagine.
be
Yeah.
a fun episode because it's just there's so many fun anecdotes, and you could even make it a traveled episode if you wanted to. But anyway, I don't want to. You're trying to make me digress again, man. You set me up for this. Uh, but those type of trips, though, like I feel like going to these one-offs, like trains are good, but sometimes those train lines don't really get you where you need to go, or
Hmm.
you aren't able to really see and get a good feel for the area on the way, and you discover things that are totally cool that maybe you didn't plan for on the way to those like destinations.
Yeah, and we'll return to more about driving later on in our discussion because Rob actually mentioned the use of taxis, and that's something that you
Yep.
wanted to touch on specifically.
Yeah.
But we'll return to that in a few minutes. One of the next places that Rob mentioned during our interview was the Miho Museum. Again, absolutely sold. Uh, if
Yeah.
if you look at the pictures of it, it just looks
Google it.
phenomenal. Yeah, yeah. So you have Googled
It's
this one.
insane looking. Yeah. I did
Yeah,
Google this one just because I wanted to make sure I had the name right. That was like checking it down. And oh man, it looks so cool.
yeah. I mean, just the
And I'm sure the
again,
pictures don't do it justice,
and he said that. Yeah, he said that in the
Yeah.
interview. So I can only imagine what it looks like in person. So again, on the list, along with the next place, Takeda Castle. Have you been to that one?
No, I haven't. I haven't. And just the way he described it too, as capturing it right at the perfect time to get that
Mm-hmm.
image of like castle in the sky. It's
Mm-hmm.
something that I don't know if you could plan a trip around it, but it seems like one of those things you may want to try to plan around,
Yeah.
just so you can get that that view and that look. Otherwise, you still would have a great experience, but it sounds like that's the aesthetic that you want to try to capture when you go there to get that castle in the sky feel.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And it must be pretty tricky because Rob said he hasn't been able to hasn't managed to get it in that exact moment.
Yeah, I
So
I guess you have to, like, plan weather too,
yeah.
because if you need it to be, like, cloudy or foggy or whatever, I don't
Right.
know. But it would be you'd have to do some research.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure it's out there too. I'm sure people plan it,
Oh, yeah.
for getting the right photo for the gram. And speaking of which, we will definitely post a picture of it on our Instagram because again, the aesthetic of the castle in the sky just really amazing. Um so one of the other things we talked about was food. And um, you can't go to Osaka and not try the takoyaki or okonomiyaki. So,
Yeah, that's like a Osaka must. It's, okonomiyaki and takoyaki are like
right.
what Osaka is known for almost.
Right, right, and in our interview, I think we all sided with Osaka over Hiroshima.
Yeah.
Uh, sorry to listeners who back the other
Reliving that
horse.
I know any Hiroshima style okonomiyaki fans out there are probably really offended, maybe even turned off the podcast at this point. They may
Hope
not be
not.
listening. But if you are listening, we still like you, and we still like okonomiyaki that's Hiroshima style. It's just
Absolutely.
we like Osaka's style a little bit better.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. For
so
me, it's the savory aspect of it
yeah,
that was just shines. And he mentioned a restaurant, Ajinora. Um, all right, you I know you and we get to talking food, we can go on forever, but
yeah.
you know, I mean, what are your thoughts about this restaurant? Have you looked into it?
I've heard of it, and just on a, again, quick and short Google search, because I didn't want to spend too much time looking at food right before lunchtime.
Yeah.
Um, all the comments were like, "This is the best in Osaka." So if you,
Yeah.
I think it's like Ajinoya is the name, and if you can get out there to try it, it sounds like, from what Rob said, but also what a lot of the reviews said too, is that it is queued up. You probably would have to wait
Yeah,
to
I
get
saw
in
that
there,
as well.
but everyone says it's worth it, worth the wait.
Yeah.
And if it lives up to, I mean, that's one thing about these places though. I get a little weary of having these ideas of these places built up in my mind, and then I get in and I'm like disappointed. But it sounds like, again, everyone has like glowing reviews. I don't think it's possible to be disappointed for
Yeah.
this place, but
Yeah,
I want to try it out.
when you see locals queuing up, it's always a pretty good sign, but and it's also a delicate balance. I
Yeah.
find with traveling, one thing that I have had to really learn is it's impossible to go into your journey without expectations. But, when you get to something, that you've really been expecting, to somehow do this thing where you, I don't know, kind of dispel the expectations and kind of approach it with a blank slate. And it's really hard to describe, but it's a delicate balance that I haven't mastered, so there's still times I go on a trip or do something and I'm like, wow, well, that wasn't as nice as I thought it would be. But then, I catch myself and say, well, maybe, it's on me for setting those expectations. Um, and next
Yeah.
time I will learn to not necessarily get rid of the expectations, because like I said, that's impossible. At least I find that it is for me.
Well,
But
you just get excited,
yeah, you
like you
get
get excited to
excited.
do something.
Yeah, and there's like I have the expectations up to the point where I'm about to experience it, and then I try to hit a reset and say, okay, let's just experience this with, like I said, kind of with a blank slate. So um that's kind of how I try to approach it.
Yeah.
With
It's easier said than done though. That's for sure.
100%. Yeah. And like I said, I haven't mastered it. I'm not even halfway to mastering it, but that's kind of the path I've been trying to take. But yeah, I do know what oh my gosh. I would love to, uh, get back to Japan and try that place. So that's those are some of the highlights that we found like really really cool throughout the time talking with Rob. One of the other things though that we mentioned towards the end of the interview was Tokyo, and Rob said that was one of the places that he actually really wanted to visit more. And same with me. On my next trip, I do plan to spend a good amount of time in Tokyo. But that's a place that you have already spent a really
Oh
decent
yeah.
amount of time. So,
Yep.
for you, do you find any value in going to Tokyo in 2022? Yeah, assuming Japan is open, is that a place you'd be interested in going?
Oh yeah. I mean, I like going there regardless of I have friends there, so obviously I want to meet up with friends, but there's some things you can get in Tokyo that you can't get anywhere else in terms of like experience. So,
Hmm.
I find things that I'm interested in. For example, like I mentioned previously, I went to a off the, not off the beaten path, but I went to a pro wrestling event in Tokyo. That I couldn't experience that in the U.S. At least I've been to
Nice.
actually another event when I lived in Iwaki. They had kind of like a tour going on, and I went to one in Iwaki when it came there. But the one I went to was like a major, kind of like it was like a tournament almost that I was able to catch, and managed to secure really cheap floor seats, like 3 rows from the ring. I guess it was like one of those like last second someone's trying to ditch the tickets, but it was
Wow.
also a mad dash to get to there when I
Mm.
did it. Um, but I would say one thing about Tokyo, and we've mentioned this in like on the train episode and just other ones, the train system can be a little overwhelming. So it may be intimidating for folks to go there to try to get off the beaten path in terms of deviating from like the big stations and big areas. But sometimes you find some really good food selections, nightlife, opportunities to really explore different avenues of Japan outside of like the Shibuya crossing,
And
Odaiba.
these days, I don't know if I don't know when's the last time you actually went to Tokyo, but um, would you guess that these days there are apps that kind of really simplify the
Yeah,
journey?
last time I went was 2019, and I know that there's a lot of like train navigation apps, and I mean Google
Yeah,
is
Google
just
Maps.
easy
Yeah.
to like navigate you. Like I was walking off a late night on a Saturday morning, walking from Shibuya. I stayed in a manga cafe because I didn't have
Nice.
I wasn't planning on staying out late, and I didn't plan on like having to find accommodations. And I just like, all right, well, let me just get a something like a manga cafe like room, and just slept in there for a little bit. And then I walked from there to Tokyo Station, which is not close. It was like a 3 hour walk. And in
Whoa.
hindsight, it was a horrible idea because it was probably like 100 degrees outside
Jeez.
with not counting humidity. But the cool part about it is that I was passing through all these parts of town and seeing things I'd never seen before. I was following the major roads, but I was seeing things that I didn't see when I would take a train from point A to point B or take a subway.
That's really cool.
Because you're on the train, it's going by quick. You just don't know
Yeah.
that, oh, there's this huge shrine like right here. I had no idea. And it's a big one, but I just never knew about it. So,
And you had spent by that time, you had already spent you'd spent a whole year in Tokyo
oh yeah, I mean, I
and
spent a year in Tokyo, and I've traveled back a bunch of times from when I lived in Iwaki. I would go down for
right.
weekends. So I mean, there was times like even when I lived there, I rode my bike everywhere. Kind of explored, and I just feel like walking around, following the train line, following the trains, but not actually riding the train, but walking it to kind of get a feel for like the neighborhoods and stuff is always kind of fun. Because you could find a station again, just pull up your map on Google and just type in station and something will pop up.
Right. Right. Wow. And so speaking of, there's walking, uh now we're going to return actually to that driving section that we mentioned earlier. Rob talked
Yeah.
about using a taxi in Japan. I've taken a couple taxis in Japan. Really, really cool experience. Different from when you take taxis in other countries. So that's also worth looking into if you haven't seen that. I've actually seen videos on YouTube of like I think like Vice has done one and stuff. It's interesting. So look into that. But do you have
Yeah.
a lot of experience with taking taxis?
Yeah, I for work, the board of education I used to work for, they would myself and the two other ALTs that worked with me at my base school would go to our base school in the morning, and then we'd be taxied off to our visiting schools. Because some of them were close, some of them were further out, and they would kind of stack us and just drop us off in a row. So we use taxis like every day, like twice a day at least. And the cool thing is that these taxi drivers, some of them were very quiet, but others were super eager to like talk and just some new English. Some wanted to learn English,
Yeah.
wanted to practice their English. Some had relatives that lived in abroad
Hmm.
that they were like, oh, I have a daughter in England, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like just like kind of like they just want to have small talk,
Yeah.
but also those people know, and they'll share knowledge about the areas, like kind of how Rob said, they can act as a kind of impromptu tour guide. um, which is really cool.
Yeah,
I
agreed.
really enjoyed, and the only offset of that is the price. Like taxis can be kind of pricey,
Yeah.
but if you are traveling with a group, like 3 or 4 people, then it kind of can offset the cost a little bit. You can load up the cab and then just kind of go where you take you. If you have a couple people, it's not as bad as if it's just you by yourself.
Yeah. And doing some I've done some of those things before, like he mentioned, where you take kind of what do you call it? It's like the scenic predetermined price route,
Yeah,
and those can be really amazing,
yeah,
and
yeah. And I did that with when I was in Shikoku. Myself and my friend who were doing the pilgrimage bumped into a couple. It was an older couple that was looking to go the next either the station or the next temple. I can't remember exactly where we were headed, but they were going to. I forget what they were going to do. Or they were planning on calling a cab, and we were walking, and we had talked a little bit earlier, and they were like, "Hey, do you want to take a cab with us?" And then the taxi driver was like, "Yeah, we have a set rate from here to here, and if you're interested, you can hop on for a ride." And we're like, "Okay, yeah, sure. We'll split the cost. It's not hitchhiking. I guess it's kind of hitchhiking. We hitched their ride with their cab, but
yeah, it's interesting.
but
It's
yeah,
at an intersection
yeah, it
between
was pretty
hitchhiking
cool.
and
Yeah,
something else. Yeah, but yeah, no, definitely. That's a something I would probably recommend. I actually have never taken an Uber or Lyft, but I have done a couple taxis, so I can vouch for that.
yeah,
So, um,
yeah. It's a great way, especially if you were in like the non-city sections, like in those countrysides or not as densely populated areas. Those drivers tend to be a little bit more connected to the communities
yeah,
and can speak more to and give you insight into places that like, oh, you should check out these like recommendations and whatnot.
yeah, absolutely. So the last thing, really quickly before we sign off for this little post-interview chat, is survival Japanese. This is something that I think we all are familiar with. And hopefully one day we won't be, because we will be to some level fluent, whatever fluency means. We've talked about that in other episodes, but that's the long-term goal. But quick before we sign off, quick take, do you think it is still possible in, well, we can't travel there right now, but let's say 2022 survival Japanese, what's your take? Is it still possible? Is it something that you think a first time traveler can do, or navigating Japan without any Japanese at all? Like, you think you can still do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like Rob said, it's definitely a country where if you don't know Japanese, it may be a little bit of a challenge, but it's not something that should deter you from traveling.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are very helpful, and sometimes will go out of their way to over accommodate your needs. We had a not to bring it back to the hitchhiking thing, but we found a guy who picked my friend and I up during the pilgrimage, and we only were expecting him to bring us to one temple, but then he ended up like trying to get us to like three other ones and try to squeeze us in before 5 o'clock. He wanted us to get there because we had mentioned that we were trying to get to X by the end of the day, but we didn't think we were going to get there, and weren't planning on we were going to look for other accommodations. And he's like, no, I'll get you there. And so he got us. It was crazy. We almost died like 3 times in the car. Um, but some folks will really go out of their way to help you, and that also goes in terms of English. Like they may call like they may call like somebody who knows English and put them on the phone and like have them talk to you. It's the little things, but I wouldn't like Japanese or lack of Japanese defer or deter you any from from traveling over there. And as in terms of survival, I mean, you can get by, like Rob says, with like some books and just some basic vocabulary, and then just kind of katakanaizing words sometimes. It really goes a long way.
Yeah, yeah, and like I think I've said multiple times on the podcast, it never hurts to try and learn something. But I think of the countries that I've been to, um, Japan was really good with I think, how do you phrase it? Accessibility for people who do not speak Japanese. And
Yeah.
so I think even if in 2022, if you find yourself in the same position as me of setting the New Year's resolution of I'm going to learn Japanese, and this is like the fifth time you set that that New Year's resolution, it's still it's still okay for you to travel to Japan because you can comfortably navigate around it. There'll be some challenges for sure, but it's totally doable. And I agree with everything you said as well about being able to have local people help you. The you know general situation of people being really really kind and helpful and understanding. So yeah, I think it definitely is something that you should be aware of, but not let it deter you. So um but yeah, with that, I think that brings us to the end of our discussion and this episode. Do you have anything else to add before we sign off?
No, just that I really enjoyed our conversation with Rob. Is both part one and part two what we had were different and similar. They covered similar topics, but the s- the span was, the scope was a little different, and I learned a lot. Just hearing about some of these places that I never knew about. So it's really cool. And like I said, I'm gonna pencil this episode in as one of those ones, like a lot of our travel episodes, that when I do go back eventually, whenever the hell that is, I will definitely have to give these a re-listen, just so that way I can remember or refresh my memory on some of these places, because there are some legit
Yeah.
gems. Like this Kinosaki Onsen is something that I don't know if I'll have to go back and re-listen to remember that. That sounds great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and same with me. Absolutely. So I will 100% be reliving and returning to this episode to look for the tips whenever we can make it back to Japan, whenever that is. So with that is all for our post interview chat, and thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
Later.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode, in part 2 of our conversation with Rob Dyer from The Real Japan. We'd like to give a very special thanks to Rob Dyer for joining us and walking us through all the off-the-beaten-path options in Kansai area. Whether it's the philosophy of travel in Rob's story from part 1, or specific things in Kansai like Kinosaki Onsen, the Miho Museum, or something like taking taxis or navigating Japan with little Japanese, I'm sure you learned something. There was so much that we enjoyed discussing and learning about across these past 2 episodes. Did you learn something new? Let us know on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Crew of Japan Podcast. That's KREWEOFJAPAN Podcast. While you're there, let us know how you're enjoying the podcast. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.